Hi, we're going to be discussing publishing and printing today as part of our History of the Book class. I know all of you have been reading diligently, and I think that you've been enjoying what you've been reading. I think that as librarians and teachers, we're very interested in especially how things, happen naturally in the world, and especially as librarians, wherever books or manuscripts or anything that is created, to record history or works of literature, etc., should be fascinating to us, and we should value from the deepest part of our beings is to understand how those works were created and how much effort went into it, so that we value it even more than we normally do. I think that I value created works a lot more now that I know how much actually blood, work, love, dedication went into creating them. So just going to go over a few things in this lecture, and we may have to go into part two if I don't want to run over a certain number of minutes, because then it's hard for you to be able to access it easily. So anyway, I want you to put yourself back in history, and I want you to think about what it must have been like to be living in a time where you had no information. And even more so than in any period of time, ancient times, there just wasn't the written word everywhere. Word of mouth, those in power, preventing those without power of having information, and it's going on today. It's not anything new. But I think what I'm trying to say is your world was very small then. You didn't have Twitter or your iPhone or the ability to get up and put the TV on every morning, and all the things we take for granted didn't exist then. And you had other motivations, just the day-to-day survival, and that went on for centuries and centuries and centuries before we get to the machine printing press as a way to distribute information. But I want you to think about, now you're in that situation, but you're also now a scribe. You're lucky enough that you basically have been employed. I'm going to use that word lightly, but you are a scribe, and your job is this arduous tallying and creating of clay tablets every day of stuff that's owned by the king, or religious reproduction that priests are asking to have recorded. So it's a very limited world that you're living in, and it's not distributed very widely. Even as the centuries go on, you see those that have and those that don't have. The ability that having money allows you access. It's just like the circle of life, if you want to look at it from The Lion King. This whole information publishing realm of how well spread was it then? Well, it wasn't. It was for a very different purpose than we see when we see the Romans and the Greeks coming and wanting to distribute the works of, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and schools for the wealthy, where scribes were made to make multiple copies of a speech so that all the students could study it, that type of thing. But I want to stop and go to a period of time that I'm fascinated with, and I think those manuscript studies that you're doing, you're coming so in touch with how much work went into doing a manuscript. Looking back to trips, to France, where I went to the Papal Library at Avignon, and I went into a couple of very small monasteries and saw the scriptoriums, brought to life to me what was going on, in that life of that monk or that scribe in that monastery to produce one copy of a manuscript. I was fascinated by the architecture of the room, the fact that no natural light, no artificial light, said it backwards, no artificial light was allowed, and that, very detailed jobs. Each person had their own part of publishing that work. And there were 5 main jobs. Calligrapher was one of them, and that's what I wanted to be if I was male and born in that century and lucky enough to be taken into a religious order and as a way of life, if that was my calling, and then to be able to produce these beautiful manuscripts. And I'm sure that they didn't think of it just exactly in those terms, but they did think it was, serving God. Copyists dealt with the basic production and did all the correspondence. Correctors, I thought, was an incredible position on that manuscript production team of finding the errors and how to correct them. Couldn't get out your whiteout then. Illuminators, the people that painted those beautiful illustrations. And then the rubricators, the red letter guys, as I call them, who painted those red letters that are so definitive of illuminated manuscripts. So before the invention of the machine known as the printing press, almost all books were printed by hand. And they made them very expensive, and they made them they made them rare. It was hard to get your hands on something. The more demand there was for it, and if somebody had the money, then yes, you could probably pay someone to make you a copy of something. But if you look at the collections that were held in these monasteries, small monasteries, they may have only limited number of monks that were producing manuscripts, and so it may take them a couple of years to do one. Middle-sized monasteries, more monks, more copies. It's pretty much a no-brainer. But even as we go towards the end of the Middle Ages, even those big libraries like the Sorbonne and the Library at Avignon, they really only had 2,000 volumes. And if you look at, that's relatively small when you think about it. But those were thought to just be gigantic collections. Let's fast forward a little bit. So scriptorium is now still very much a part of monastic life. But we now see that universities are starting to come into existence in the 13th century. And with that comes multiple students needing multiple copies. So how are we going to handle this? We can't just have that manuscript culture as it's known. It's not working. So what are we going to do now? How are we going to meet this demand? Well, we have these stationers' guilds popping up. And what would happen is they would take the book and they would, divide it up, and they would send it out to different copyists. So you might see 7 people copying chapter 1, and then 7 other people someplace else copying chapter 7. So now you have, I kind of think of it as outsourcing, but you have these guilds creating multiple copies now. The ability to have it all go back to a central, be recollated, and now where you had 1, you now have 20. So they were secular. I mean, religious works were in very high demand. We'll talk about Gutenberg later on this semester and how influential he was in his motivation for the printing press. But right now we're still with this secular Stationers Guild system of book production. It's producing, though, religious and non-religious material, which is very interesting for a secular group to be doing. I think it's interesting if you look at the scriptorium and where is it alive and well today in modern times. Well, in the Judaic faith, the Torah can only be produced, the Torah scroll can only be produced by hand on parchment. So a scribe still does that. So in the Jewish communities, the sofer or the scribe is a very well respected person in that community because it's an art form that not many people still are able to do. So it's interesting to see that being a scribe is still a very respected position in a community. And we're going to stop with this section, and I'm going to come back and talk to you about the Chinese in part 2. Thank you.